Welcome to the Things We Think and Do Not Say with Christina and Chad. Hello and welcome to the Things We Think and Do Not Say. I'm Christina.
And I'm Chad. So today we're going to talk about what are the things that you're not supposed to talk about in general, politics. And, so you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics. Those are the two things that people say you should never talk about. And I think we've taken that to a whole new level lately, where we decide we want to talk about politics, and then this massive explosion happens, and people get angry, and people stop talking, and it's nasty and not healthy. So we're going to talk about politics not like this is the policy or the political party that I like, but more, can we have those conversations? How can we have those conversations and go from there?
Yeah, and in a lot of ways when we talk about, we shouldn't talk about politics and we should keep it out of conversations in certain places. The problem is that the political can be personal, and in many cases is. And so not talking about this in some ways actually makes things a little bit worse. And so, Chad talked about that extreme end of like talking about it all over the place and it erupting into these, big fights. And this other extreme of like, we just don't talk about it. That's not going to work. And so how do we find that middle ground where we're able to talk about this, but not necessarily have it erupt into big chasms?
Yeah, and I think there's for me, there's kind of two separate pieces of it. So talking politics with family and friends, and then just randomly talking politics. And the difference being, the random person you're talking politics with, you don't have that relationship already established. It's just someone that you're in the same space with for whatever reason, and a conversation ensues, as opposed to families in the same space. The holidays are coming up, so like Thanksgiving dinner. I remember, over the past few years, people saying, "Oh man, Thanksgiving, crazy uncle so and so, don't talk politics." Or after the fact, people talking about how their Thanksgiving dinner was ruined because there was this discussion of politics, and it just got really nasty and unhealthy.
And in some ways can turn into very traumatic situations where people start to say very hurtful things. And like I said, with politics being personal, in many cases, walking away truly feeling like their identities and who they are as a person have been attacked. And really, that's what we want to avoid. We want to, help to prevent that pain from occurring. Hopefully, as much as you can.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something that really hits home for me, and I don't know when it started, but we're so quick to not see people as human beings. As someone I disagree with, as opposed to, the enemy, or we almost take the human nature out of it and the relationship piece out of it, and we only see that person as their political flavor, which is never healthy. Anytime we take someone's identity out of something, you've created an unhealthy dynamic in which there's really only one way it can go, and it's usually not good. It's not going to go well when we start dehumanizing people and just seeing them as their label. We talked about this when we were talking about mental health. I think that was the last one we did. Talking about mental health. When we just see someone as their mental illness, it's not healthy for you or that person. I think the same plays for politics. It's not healthy to see someone as, their political party, their political candidate, or their political flavor, because then that's all you see, and you get so hung up in that you don't see anything else.
Yeah, it really narrows the person down to just one singular part or piece of who they are, versus recognizing all of the amazing and wonderful intersections that we all have, where all of our identities come together and make us who we are. And so just focusing on one aspect of our identity or someone else's identity really isn't seeing them for who they are. It's just seeing that one particular aspect. And in some cases, it's an aspect that you don't agree with. It's an aspect that there are these kind of hard lines drawn in the sand.
And I think, if you said it's personal. Like people usually it's very personal. So when we dehumanize, that's not good. But I think the other piece, we're so passionate about it that we don't listen, and we're dug in. And I've said many times, I think as a society we've lost this ability to reflect, this ability for self-reflection, to look in the mirror and go, well, basically look in the mirror and just look at anything other than, oh, this shirt makes me look fat or whatever. We're still able to do that, but beyond that, we're not able to look deeper at ourselves. And if we're not willing to look at our political flavor and say, we got some issues, there's not a political party that doesn't have issues. There's really not. And I think, I was reading an article yesterday, I think, about immigration. So immigration under the previous administration was one of those hot button issues that everybody got inflamed about. Well, we still have an immigration issue at our border, and we're still getting inflamed about it. So the reality is there's a lot of these issues that it's politically expedient for the politicians to not really deal with it. Because they're ultimately, the majority of our politicians, unfortunately, their biggest concern is getting reelected. And if their biggest concern is getting reelected, it's not the issues that you and I are really fighting about.
Yeah. I mean, obviously politicians have their own agendas, and, as Chad said, they're going to highlight the areas that they know are going to be likely to get them reelected. And so I'm going to touch on the biggest things, the things that are sort of sensationalized, and kind of let the other stuff fall by the wayside. There are a lot of issues that our political leaders maybe should be dealing with or could be dealing with, and in reality they're probably only going to focus on a handful of them, and that is unfortunate. It is unfortunate that that's the way that the system is, and again, it's those big kind of headliney ones that they think are going to get their constituents to continue to vote for them are going to be the ones that they're going to be the loudest about and actually make some effort towards.
Yeah, so I read an article, again, this morning, and it was about the church, but it was about the division in the church, and the answer being sitting around a table. So I think there's something other than those like Thanksgiving dinners that devolve. I think there is something powerful about sitting down and sharing a meal together, and there's a bonding that can happen in that moment. And I think if we can combine something like that, where you're sitting down, you're sharing a meal together, and you're still seeing each other as people, as human beings, and able to have a conversation. Now, your profession, the counseling profession, is a lot about listening. So a lot of people think, oh, counselors, they're just going to give me advice. Not. I've learned, so one of the beauties of, one of the positives of COVID is I've been able to sit in on counselor education classes, and videos, and listen to Christina teach, and I think it's probably one of the most common misperceptions of counseling. Well, I'm going to go to a counselor and they're going to tell me what I should do to fix it, and that's really not it. But I think we could all, non-counselors could all learn a thing or two just about listening. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, just not jumping in to problem solve or give advice. And this is certainly something that we've probably touched on in previous videos and probably will touch on again. But I think as humans, we want to fix things. We see someone in pain,
Definitely.
A loved one. We want to make it better. We want to do anything we can, say anything we can to prevent that pain or prevent that hurt. And so we go into problem solving mode. And that doesn't usually help because, in a lot of ways, if I'm dealing with a problem, I've probably already done the problem solving in my brain, right? I've already brainstormed. I've already tried to work on things. And so that's not going to be what's going to help me. I need someone to just listen to me, to be able to feel like someone else can maybe understand in some way what I'm experiencing. And sometimes just talking about it and processing it out verbally can be helpful and can give a sense of peace or calm or comfort. And sometimes that's really all that we need. And so as counselors, we want to listen. We want to hear your story. And in addition, although we don't give advice, we often will use interventions to help people, and it's not okay to start jumping into those interventions until you know the person's story, right? Like, if I meet you on the street and don't know anything about you except that you're having this issue, how am I in any way, shape, or form going to be able to guide you? I don't know anything about you, your life, your experiences. And so that listening piece is so important, for us to be able to learn and be able to know how we can best help and support the other person.
So distinction with listening, and I'm gonna butcher the phrasing, I think, but I've heard it said, are you listening to hear, or are you listening to respond? And I get guilty of that sometimes when I hear somebody. I'm like, oh, well, I kind of hear what you're saying, but I'm already trying to figure out what my next question is. And so here's a perfect example. So how many times do you meet someone for the first time, and you introduce yourself, and they introduce themselves, and you're already trying to think of the next question to ask that person to continue the conversation because you're getting to know them, and then when you leave 20 minutes later, who was that? It's like, oh, their name was, well, they went to school here, and they did this, and they did this, and they're from here, and you can't remember their name. You can remember everything about them, but you can't remember their name because you weren't really listening to that. You were trying to figure out what that next question was. I'm guilty of that a lot. I want that information. I want to get to know somebody, and then I forget the most basic piece of it because I'm trying to figure out what's next.
Yeah, being able to be more present in the moment and actually listen to what the person has to say, rather than jumping to, as Chad said, the next question, but in many cases, your next argument. And so I know when I was in my PhD program, we had an assignment in one of our courses where we had to put ourselves in somewhat of an uncomfortable position. We had to put ourselves around people who maybe had different beliefs or values or thoughts or experiences than us, and really listen and learn about their sort of side of things. And in my experience in doing this, I selected one that is something I'm very passionate about. And so it was very hard to sit back and listen without trying to kind of counter all of their points or argue back about how, there was maybe flaws in their logic or their thinking. And I recognized what an important experience it was to really listen to why they had the beliefs that they had and what led them to take the actions that they took. And maybe I walked away continuing not to necessarily agree with their side of the issue, but I at least understood it more and was able to understand them a little bit better as people. And I think that highlighted for me, again, the work that we do as counselors, but the work that we should all be doing as humans is really just listening to listen and not listening just to respond.
I think sometimes we feel, not you and I, but like we as society, in this political conversation, we have to convert someone, that we have to win their vote. We have to convince them that what they're thinking is wrong. I'm a curious person, so like in those conversations, I like to ask a lot of questions to better understand that point of view. But over the last few years, even that has been something that has just gotten people. I'm like, I'm literally just asking questions that I don't understand. Like, I don't see it from your perspective. We're in a different political perspective, but I want to understand why you feel that. Not necessarily, I may or may not change my vote, whatever. But I genuinely want to understand, how someone can have drastically different beliefs. And even within a family, it's like, okay, so we grew up in the same, we grew up together, we were raised the same, we're from the same, socioeconomic class. We have all of these things in common. And then when it comes to politics, we're completely different sides of the spectrum. Well, how does that happen and why?
And even generationally, right?
Correct.
So, like, yes, you've had different experiences and grew up in different households, but these are the people who are raising you. And so how is it that, one generation's beliefs maybe are very different than another generation's?
Yeah, and this is even playing out right now with the vaccine. So, when the pandemic first started, we were trying so hard to protect our senior citizens. First to get the vaccine, all that stuff. And now what I'm seeing a lot from older members of our church is them really trying to convince their kids to get the vaccine, which is really, it's like completely different shift. And because initially it was kids trying to protect the parents, and now it's parents going, well, we have this vaccine now, get the vaccine. And it's really kind of interesting to watch that play out. I haven't quite solved that mystery yet, but that's interesting to watch play out. Just understanding that just because you're from the same family, the same group, you may not have the same beliefs or the same views. But can you have that conversation? And I think too often right now the answer is no, and it's heartbreaking.
And even, within political parties, if you have two or more people from the same political party and they sit down and have a conversation, often they're going to realize that while some of the issues they may agree heavily upon, but there are lots of issues that they don't. And same thing across the aisle is that you may take some people from one political party and some people from another, and you find that there are actually a lot of issues that they agree on, because there's a high likelihood that anyone who aligns themselves with a specific political party, we're going to talk about the two major ones, don't necessarily agree with all of the politics within that party or all of their politicians within that party. And so ultimately sitting down and having those conversations, you can find that there's a lot more issues that you probably agree on or have maybe some similar connections or views on than are really all that different.
Yeah, but I think we also have to get outside of that echo chamber, that bubble that we only talk and associate with people of the same flavor, right? So, and again, I had lunch with a pastor yesterday, and it's all over the place. In churches, oh well, this is a liberal church, so I'm going to go to that church. This is a conservative church, I'm going to go to that church. So we've taken we're starting to take every aspect of society and dividing it into our politics. So then what happens? We never have that opportunity to understand and get to know people. Our news coverage has gotten this way. You have your far right news media, you have your far left news media, and I hope this isn't breaking news, pun intended, that they're both full of crap. They both have their own slant, and that's so heavy that neither one of them are accurate in what they're portrayed. And there can be a major event going on, and you put on one channel and the headline is this, and you put on the other channel and the headline is a completely different side. It's the same issue, but the coverage isn't the same. Or worse, one station doesn't even cover anything and the other station does, and it flip-flops based on... Which
leaves us completely unaware and uneducated
right.
as voting individuals.
Right, because we're only getting the flavor that we like. You can go get your favorite ice cream shop and get your favorite flavor of ice cream. Nobody cares. You can do it all you want. But I think when it comes to things like politics, I think you have to kind of sample. I love sampling it. Oh, when you can go to the ice cream place and they give you a little spoon sample of each of the different flavors. I think we need to do that with our politics. I think we need to be able, to just taste, hear, listen to, that other flavor. One, so we just don't become completely disconnected, and I feel like that's where we're heading, and it's not healthy, and it's not scary. I mean, it's scary. It's not healthy.
It's scary, yeah. And, there's so many times in history and currently in different areas and arenas that we do create this us and them divide. And so the more that we separate ourselves from people who might have differences in beliefs or backgrounds, experiences, whatever, we're continuing to perpetuate that us and them divide. And ultimately all that does is say we're this in-group and they're the out-group, and we don't want anything, we don't want to associate anything that might connect us with that out-group. And so it creates these really, again, unhealthy dynamics where you're only seeing this small, tiny portion, whereas there's so much more to it, right? We're not going to be exposed to people who have different experiences, different understandings, different beliefs, and that really ends up limiting us. It doesn't only hurt the people who are kind of on the outsides, the people that we've marginalized or kind of pushed to the outskirts, but it hurts us as well because we don't benefit from being able to have a greater understanding of ourselves, other people, the world. And so, we need to consider how much, that division is ultimately hurting everyone.
Yeah, I think. So the podcast says the things we think and do not say. So if I thought it, I need to say it, right?
I think that would be on key.
Okay. So I think, and therefore am saying, the thought that went through my head was, is that a white people problem? Where we have the multitude of privileges in society. So I think we've been able to not have to engage in those things, and we've made it okay. We've told ourselves it's okay, and I think we're getting to a point where many people, maybe not enough, are recognizing that maybe we do need to see and hear other perspectives. And I serve in a congregation with a female pastor alongside a female pastor. Her experience as a female pastor is not the same as mine as a male pastor. I can't tell her what it's like to be a female pastor because I don't have the packaging for that.
Or the experiences.
So I can listen and I can have a better understanding of the differences. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how good the clarity is. I'm also not black. I don't have experiences as a black person. I can ask, I can listen. We're so hesitant. I feel like we're so hesitant to actually have those conversations. And then when we get into them, if we don't agree, can we ask in a way that's not cancerous? Can we ask for clarification without tone and expression, without veins popping? Guilty sometimes. I had another pastor ask me if I supported Black Lives Matter last week, and that led to a very contentious conversation. And so I had my watch, and I went back, and I could tell exactly when the conversation was happening because my heart rate was like through the roof because I was frustrated. I was pissed. I think I did a pretty good. No, I didn't. I didn't do as good a job as I'd like to have done in asking questions in a non pissed off manner, and I will claim that. But I think can we try and take the emotion out? And sometimes it's hard, but can we try and take the emotion out of it that we're generally asking to understand?
I would actually argue that we don't necessarily have to take emotion out of it. I would say taking out the defensiveness, taking out the oh gosh, I don't even know how to call it, the anger or rage at someone else having a different emotion. But I think that the emotional piece should be there. We should be aware of our own and each other's emotional experiences. Not just speaking on the experiences from a very logical, brain place, but also speaking into our hearts and the way that these things impact each of us. I think that that's important. But to kind of backtrack and kind of respond to this question that you brought up about, is this a white person problem? And so, in many cases, people that have the level of privilege from an identity, whether it is through racial, skin color, ethnicity, gender you brought up, any kind of position of power or privilege, yes, it does become their problem because one, it hurts them just as much, maybe not just as much, it hurts them in different ways, but it still hurts them as much as those populations, individuals, and groups that are marginalized, but also because they do hold the power and privilege, and so they're in a position where they could do more about it. And so I listened to a podcast recently, I wish I could remember the name of it, but an episode where they talked about, it was a white individual counselor educator who was talking about the way that racism impacts white people, right? And not as far as oh, I'm white and racism is against my skin color, but the way that us being racist in a racist society, in systems that are racist, hurts us as white people because we don't always have those opportunities to learn, or we shut ourselves off from them. And it can be so beneficial for us to be able to open our hearts, our minds, our ears, to be able to have those experiences.
So, I like food. This isn't breaking news, but maybe this is helpful. So I don't really know what. So when I think of American food, right? I think of like steak and potatoes, or like a cheeseburger and French fries. Yeah, it says French, but we can, yeah, you know what I mean. But I mean like when I think of American food, but then I can't imagine like not eating pizza or tacos or like foods of other nationalities. So maybe that's a way to kind of open some eyes and look at it and go, okay, so let's imagine the world where all I can eat are these American foods, and we limit ourselves culturally when we only associate or identify and hang out with and converse with people of the same. I'm gonna use flavor again because I'm on that food thing.
I think it's about lunchtime.
It is, and my stomach's gonna growl here in a second, and I am salivating. But I think if we look at it from that perspective, maybe it's a less abrasive way to kind of look at it and get into that conversation. Wait a minute. So what would your meals look like if you only ate one culture? And I mean, like my grandparents aren't real big on other cultural dishes. Like, yeah, I think they might eat a taco, but like I'm not taking my grandma to Chipotle. Of course, it's Chipotle for her, but whatever. I'm not taking her to a Mexican restaurant for dinner. She's not going to eat anything there. But I think that it also limits her, not just food wise, but her upbringing and her culture was limiting. It was largely white. It was largely the same identities, and it limits your perspective. Mm-hmm. And maybe if we look at it from a food standpoint and go, wow, like I can't imagine my meals being that generic. I don't want to say American food is generic, but you know what I'm getting at. Limited, yeah.
Yeah, and so you're taking it from a food perspective. I take it usually from like a celebration perspective. And not even just celebrations, but also just traditions. And so when we think about American traditions and holidays, most of them didn't start here in America, right? They're things that different people have brought to the United States. Different things that came from other places, and maybe coming to America, they were kind of changed a bit. I mean, think about modern day Christmas. It is nothing like traditional Christmas from other countries. But in so many ways, we would be essentially limited to Thanksgiving, which has its own cultural implications and challenges. The 4th of July, and so, what are all of the customs and traditions and wonderful things that we've kind of taken on from all of the wonderful diversity that our country has, and the ways that some of that is growing. I mean, I remember being in elementary school, maybe it was late elementary school, it might not have been till middle school before I learned about Kwanzaa, and such a wonderful celebration for individuals to have, and I had no idea that it existed. And while I don't celebrate it, it is not something that's specifically, for me a custom, but I love to be able to learn about it, and to be able to understand a bit more about why it's celebrated and what the customs are to celebrate it. And so as I've grown, I've continued to try and put myself in positions to learn. Another thing that Chad had brought up that I wanted to get back to is being able to ask those questions of other people and listen to them. And one of the difficult things is that a lot of times this can put burdens and a lot of weight and expectations on those individuals from marginalized communities. And so yes, those are the experiences we want to learn about, need to learn about, and really listen to. But if we don't do the work ourselves by reading material, purchasing and reading the material that is put out there by individuals from marginalized communities, if we don't attend seminars, webinars, talks of individuals from those communities, buy their movies, watch their movies, shows, those are things that we can do without adding additional labor and burden to those people. And when they are in those positions where they want to share and want to give this information, be present, and don't make yourself an additional weight than the weight that's already carried by those individuals in marginalized communities, especially from multiple marginalized communities.
Yeah, there's a book that just came out called Black Fatigue, by Mary Frances Winters, I believe. And when I say just came out, I mean like a few months ago just came out. Great book, and it gets at this fatigue, this black fatigue, and it, for me, was really helpful to understand all the levels of fatigue and all the levels of things that people of color deal with, that I have the ability to not have. I've had the ability to not even know that it was a thing. I go, wow, like that's got to be exhausting. I can't imagine, this. And the book does a really good job. So highly recommend, if you're looking for a resource, like Christina said, to kind of get at a basic understanding of, in this case, race issues. That's an excellent book at helping to understand where we're at.
Yeah, and so just to kind of bring it back to politics a little bit, is that even within groups that we're a part of, our experience doesn't indicate that that's the same experience as everyone else. So if I look at all of my intersecting identities, if I'm faced with like another white, female, non-immigrant, Christian, they're not going to necessarily have the same experiences as I do. And so kind of when I talked earlier about like within the different political parties, there may be a lot of in-group variation, the same as with race, gender, all of that. And so even people from our own communities, we need to be able to listen to them as well and not make those assumptions that their experience is exactly the same as us. And then when we look at other communities, other sides of the aisle, other identities, that we don't assume that theirs is 100% completely different. There's going to be a lot of things that we're going to be able to connect on as well. And so just really lowering our assumptions and recognizing our biases, having that self-awareness so that we can move forward and help either create or sustain those healthy connections with other people.
Yeah, so I went down a rabbit hole a few weeks ago, how to run for school board, which did not go over well. And part of it was a frustration of our local school board. And I didn't research enough. Don't worry, honey, I didn't get far enough down that rabbit hole. Like, okay, so what's it going to cost to run for office? Which takes me back to one of the biggest issues I think we have in politics is money. There's so much money in politics, and it's so, especially national politics. Local is not quite as bad in terms of financial gain. But, national politics, Washington, D.C., you can make a lot of money in politics. And coming from the profession I do, that servant leadership idea, for me that's what politics should be. That idea of servant leadership. And if you're getting loaded off of servant leadership, there's a problem. You're serving the people who are giving you money, maybe not the people you should be serving. So I mean, maybe that's an issue that can bring the polarization together. Say, wait a minute. So why is it that this guy from my party, or this girl from this party, this woman from this party, this woman from this party, why did they go to Washington with this level of net worth, and now they're at this level of net worth? What's wrong with this pic? Sorry, I was out of the screen.
And suddenly in the pocket of the large corporations,
yeah, and you go, oh, wait a minute, maybe they're not actually serving me. Because I think that's part of the problem. We have this illusion that the people that we vote for, especially nationally, are serving us, and I think way too often they're making sure they can get reelected, and they are making some pretty good coin, and that's really not the job. It shouldn't be the job. And then we have only two parties, which is another disaster. But
yeah, I mean, we obviously have more than two parties, but two parties that just
we don't
take everything over.
Yeah.
And so if we were to kind of create sort of a few tips, a few ideas on how to have healthier conversations, how to dialogue about this, in different settings and trying to keep the peace as much as possible. Let's talk about some of them.
Breathe. Breathe.
A big one.
Get out of your echo chamber where all you hear are the same things. Like, I know during the last presidential election, during some of the debates, we would flip between channels to try and get the different. And if you've never done that, do it. I mean, that's it's eye opening. To watch. I'm going to watch the debate on Fox News, and then I'm going to watch the debate on MSNBC. I mean, those are widely viewed as the left and the right media, and you know which ones are which. I'm sure. And if you watch those two for any political news, the difference in how it's presented is night and day. It's like it's not even the same issue. Mm-hmm. If they even cover the same issue. And that's problematic. So diversify where you're getting your information. AP is generally pretty down the center. There was a thing floating around Facebook that had like a diagram, and it placed all the different news and the news resources sort of lean.
There are a few that are still pretty in the middle, so kind of checking them out as much as possible, but then also checking out the extremes on both sides. So we have breathe, right? Taking a moment, kind of internally, letting yourself have that moment before speaking or responding. Second, diversify where you're getting your information, the sources that you're exposing yourself to. The third, we talked about listening a lot. Listening to really hear and to understand, so that involves active listening, being able to reflect back to the person what you heard them say, being able to be curious about what their beliefs are, and not just trying to shoot them down or ask continuous questions about them, but really listening.
I think the last one, don't blow up a relationship over politicians who don't give a damn about you. Don't blow up a relationship over someone who doesn't give a damn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that with a caveat to that last one is that there are going to be potentially toxic people in your life. There's going to be people whose political values maybe indicate things that are harmful about them to you as an individual. And so it's important not to feel like we're saying you have to stay in close ties with all of these people. Correct. Even if they're toxic or harmful to you, and that's absolutely not what we're saying. But certainly not blowing up a relationship simply because maybe you're voting for two different individuals that have two different agendas that ultimately aren't necessarily serving either one of you.
Yeah, that's a great clarification, because you're right. If it's someone who is actively working towards policies that harm you,
your community,
right? Then completely different story. But I think we're throwing away relationships for things that are far less, that are far from that line, just because you voted for this person.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Absolutely. And so as always, we're going to have our contact information on the screen, so you can email us your thoughts, ideas, or comments about this episode, any of our other ones, ideas you have about future episodes, and if you want to be on the show. Coming up, we're going to have our first guest, but we'd love to have more. And so contact us if you have a topic that you're interested in talking about, or even if you don't have a topic, you just want to join us for whatever topic we happen to be talking about. So we'd love to hear from you.
See you, everybody.
Bye.